Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhi. Then a disposable piece. A low-level pawn assigned because of his lack of real skill. She dismissed that explanation, saying his death itself wasn't the issue, and the man speaking to her was revealed to be her brother Ed Trovan, the same one seen earlier at the pub. Emil explained that the real problem was that the demon dragon had personally approached Theo, and rumors were spreading that Evelyn had influenced that decision, which complicated things further. This meant they could no longer interfere by assigning Theo a new instructor, cutting off one of their main methods of control. If Theo continued to gain attention, it would become increasingly difficult to seize control of the Rose Palace without drawing suspicion. At that moment, Action entered casually, questioning why they were so tense over this situation, acting like it wasn't a big deal at all. He reassured them that there was no way the clan head would take interest in something like this, so their plan could continue as intended without disruption. Emil immediately challenged that attitude, reminding him that their entire strategy depended on Theo remaining weak and insignificant, since that was the only way to take over the Rose Palace without offending the clan leader. Action acknowledged her point, but remained completely confident, stating that Theo was still powerless no matter what had happened recently, because someone like him couldn't have changed that much in such a short time. He believed that Evelyn and the demon dragon had always been drawn to underdogs, so there was no need to overreact to this situation. However, Ed wasn't convinced at all, and warned him not to underestimate the situation or treat it so lightly. In response, Action pulled out a letter with a fly grin and said that if they were so worried, he would personally deal with Theo, treating it like a game and reminding him of his place in the hierarchy. Later, the scene shifted back to the training grounds, where Evelyn praised Theo for his performance during practice, acknowledging that he had done well. Theo thanked her sincerely, saying that learning under a proper master like her felt completely different compared to before. She then brought up the topic of the White Armor Dragon cavalry again, mentioning that it might have been better for him to accept the offer, and asking why he turned it down. Theo paused to think, realizing that in his previous life, joining that elite force had been his dream, and rejecting it now wasn't something he could honestly say he didn't regret. However, he understood that accepting it at this stage would limit his growth since he had much bigger goals this time, compared to the advantages he could gain by rising to the top after the awakening ceremony. Joining the cavalry right now didn't seem nearly as valuable, so instead, he simply smiled and said he didn't want to rely on special treatment, adding that he still felt unprepared and preferred to continue training for the awakening ceremony. Evelyn responded by pointing out that the commander would likely be disappointed after being rejected so directly, which made Theo think further. At that moment, he decided to test his observation skill for the first time, activating it and reading Evelyn's stats instantly, confirming that she was indeed a high-ranking swordswoman. Alongside that, he could see her thoughts and emotions, learning that she'd admired his humility and character, and that teaching him gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. He also noticed something unexpected, a lingering feeling of nostalgia, as she clearly missed her time with the White Armored Dragon cavalry. Theo was genuinely impressed by how useful this ability was, realizing it gave him access to information far beyond normal perception. As he focused on that final detail about Evelyn missing the cavalry, he found it particularly interesting, which made him think more deeply about her motivations. Just then, another man entered the scene and introduced himself as Sibaldria, stating that he had come from the Southern Inspection Post and had something important to discuss with Theo. Theo didn't know what this was about, so he immediately activated observation again to gather more information. This time, the result made him uneasy, as he discovered that Sibaldria had a strong desire to spar with him, which instantly made Theo nervous. The thought of fighting someone with such an intense lustful aura made him sweat. Right on cue, a system notification appeared once again, revealing the fourth tutorial quest. The objective was to discard the title of Ragnar's Imbusel, and the progress bar showed that he had already reached nearly 28% completion. Sibald stepped forward and openly declared that he wanted to follow young Master Theo, admitting without hesitation that he had once been among those who ignored him as nothing more than an untalented failure. He confessed that he genuinely believed the title of Ragnar's imbecile suited him perfectly back then, and while Theo appreciated the honesty, he couldn't help feeling slightly irritated because the guy was basically insulting him without even realizing it. Sibbald continued, explaining that his opinion had changed after learning that Theo trained every single morning harder than anyone else, showing relentless effort despite his reputation. What truly changed his perspective, however, was witnessing the duel against that Fraudrendon, where he had watched the instructor's head fly through the air in a moment that completely stunned him. Seeing Theo's growth with his own eyes left a deep impression, and the image of the demon dragon Julius Ragnar, personally inviting Theo to the White Armor Dragon Cavalry, had burned itself into his memory. From that moment onward, Sibbald declared that Theo had become his idol, explaining that he himself had once been labeled the idiot of the Southern Inspection Office and had nearly given up on his own path. But after seeing Theo rise like that, something inside him changed, and now all he wanted was a chance to cross swords with the person who inspired him. His words were blunt and completely genuine, which caught Theo off guard, because he was usually suspicious of people's intentions. However, after using observation, he could clearly see that Sibbald's respect was real, and that his only desire was to spar. Nothing more. It was unexpected, but Theo felt pleased, realizing that instead of just attracting jealous challengers after defeating Ragnar and gaining Julius's attention, there were also people who genuinely admired him and wanted to stand by his side. That meant there were still individuals within Ragnar who carried true pride, and this worked perfectly in his favor, since he would need capable and trustworthy people around him if he intended to become the clan head in the future. On top of that, he could use this situation to push forward his current objective of discarding the humiliating title of imbecile, something he had never been able to escape in his past life. Determined to move forward, Theo turned to Evelyn and asked for permission to spar, and she agreed immediately, encouraging him to showcase his abilities properly. Theo raised his blade in salute and formally introduced himself as Theo Ragnar, an apprentice swordsman of the Rose Palace, preparing for the awakening ceremony under the guidance of Evelyn Narville. Sibbald awkwardly returned the salute and introduced himself as an apprentice swordsman from the Southern Inspection Post, mentioning that he inherited the quick sword style of the Cure clan. As soon as the spar began, Sibbald launched forward explosively, charging like a madman, aiming to end the fight instantly. Theo met the attack head-on, blocking it cleanly as sparks flew from the clash of their blades. Sibbald's speed was undeniable, clearly his greatest strength, and from that first exchange alone, he realized that Theo's skill was absolutely real. Meanwhile, Theo couldn't help but wonder why someone this capable had been labeled an idiot, since in his previous life, he wouldn't have lasted even a few exchanges against someone like this. But things were different now, and Theo quickly went on the offensive, swinging his sword with overwhelming force that sent Sibbald flying backward like a ragdoll, knocking the weapon right out of his hands. For Theo's current level, this was easy as fuck. Meanwhile, Sibbald nearly vomited from the impact that struck his solar plexus before crashing into the training stands. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured, and after struggling to get back on his feet, he immediately praised Theo's swordsmanship and conceded defeat without hesitation, showing genuine respect. Theo maintained his composure, returning the salute and acknowledging it as a good fight, carrying himself with calm confidence. As he held his sword up, he caught his own reflection in the polished blade, which suddenly gave him an idea. He activated observation on himself and discovered that it worked just as effectively, revealing his own status in detail. His talents included observation, player, Ragnar, and several others that were still locked, hinting at future potential. He saw that he was currently the level 1 swordsman with balance stats, but what stood out the most was his abnormally high magic power, reaching 190 points. Now that he could view his stats numerically, everything became clearer, and he realized that completing more quests would unlock additional talent slots, giving him even more abilities in the future. He quickly figured that his high magic power likely came from the combination of his past life's accumulated strength and the dragon heart within him. However, one detail immediately annoyed him. His luck stat was sitting at -49, which looked absolutely terrible. He couldn't help but think that all the misfortune he suffered in his previous life might have been tied to this curse stat, and he made a mental note to find a way to improve it as soon as possible. While he was busy analyzing his own abilities, Theo failed to notice that a group of young swordsmen had gathered around him, forming a loose circle with unclear intentions. He considered that although Rendon had been a fraud, he was still technically a mid-rank swordsman, and defeating him while gaining recognition from someone like Julius naturally drew attention. Within Ragnar's rule of strength, people would either envy him or admire him. And before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally, and from what Evelyn observed, this group clearly belonged to the latter. The young men stared at Theo with visible respect, amazed that the rumors about him were actually true, and many of them imagined themselves in Sybil's position during that spar, wondering if they could even block a single strike from him. That thought alone ignited their desire to challenge him even more, eager to test themselves against the rising talent. Among those gathered, one particular individual stood out, a young swordsman named E.O. Naleni. Theo scanned the crowd carefully and felt satisfied seeing their reactions shift toward respect and admiration. His eyes locked onto E.O. Nallen, and without hesitation, he called him out, catching the young man completely off guard in front of everyone. Theo calmly invited him forward for a spar, and E.O. stepped in without fear, giving a firm salute before introducing himself as the third son of Viscount Nallen, specializing in double ascension swordsmanship. Theo returned the gesture casually and wished him a good fight without dragging out unnecessary formality. Without wasting another second, both fighters took their stances and immediately engaged, their blades colliding sharply with each exchange. As the fight progressed, Theo could feel his basic swordsmanship improving in real time, each clash sharpening his instincts and control. E.O. Nallen proved he wasn't just another weak opponent, as he moved with speed and precision, eventually slipping in a clever slash that seemed impossible to counter at first glance. At that exact moment, Theo felt everything around him slow down, as if time itself had stretched for just an instant. He adjusted his grip instinctively and angled his blade perfectly, intercepting the strike with flawless timing. The impact sent E.O. Nallen's sword flying out of his hand, completely disarming him in a single decisive move. That critical defense didn't just win the exchange, it also boosted Theo's proficiency in the changing heart swordsmanship. E.O. Nallen stood there weaponless, fully understanding the gap between them and accepted his defeat without resistance. What caught Theo off guard, however, was the system response that followed. Gaining E.O. Nallen's approval actually increased his. That realization immediately sparked a thought in his mind. Maybe his luck wasn't random at all, but tied directly to how others perceived him. If reputation influenced luck, then improving his standing through victories might be the key to fixing his terrible negative stat. The idea felt almost ridiculous, but at the same time, it made perfect sense within the system's logic. Without wasting time, he called the next challenger, Bennett Romero, and the match ended almost instantly in Theo's favor, making it feel like an easy win. With another approval secured, his luck increased, again by a single point, confirming his theory further. Then came Eric Morin, who at least managed to put up a fight, though it was clear from the start that he was outmatched. After that, Theo defeated Manfred Nonbert, and then moved on to Manuel Noir without slowing down completely, overwhelming him in the process. Even Vero Perink, who had a rough and intimidating appearance, barely lasted a minute before being taken down decisively. As the matches continued, Theo became completely absorbed in the rhythm of battle, stacking victory after victory, including another clean win against Daniel Riemann. By this point, he was fully immersed, almost enjoying the flow of combat itself as his confidence and control kept rising. When he finally looked around for another opponent, he realized no one else was stepping forward anymore, as if the crowd had collectively decided they didn't want to be the next one to get crushed. Despite pushing himself close to exhaustion from constant sparring, Theo checked his quest progress, expecting a significant jump, but the result left him slightly annoyed. The progress toward removing his imbecile title had only increased by 1%, which felt way too low considering how many opponents he had defeated. After thinking it through, he realized the reason was probably because most of these people already respected him now, so defeating them didn't change much in terms of reputation. If he wanted real progress, he would need to challenge stronger opponents or prove himself in front of those who still doubted him. Either way, one thing was clear: continuing like this wouldn't be enough, and if he wanted to truly change his standing, he would need a different approach altogether. Suddenly, a man stepped forward, parting the crowd while commenting that Theo looked exhausted after non-stop fighting. Theo immediately brushed it off, saying he would rest later since he could still continue fighting without issues. Hearing that confidence, the armored man formally introduced himself and requested a sparring match without hesitation. He revealed himself as the Silver Lion, Remington Narso, instantly shocking Theo and the surrounding young swordsmen. No one expected someone of his status to appear here so casually, especially among trainees and apprentices. Remington was one of the 4 Hounds of the North, the strongest of their generation before awakening. The group included Hulkus Lanky, Theo Ragnar, Remington Narso himself, and Action Ragnar from Camellia Palace. These 4 held absolute dominance among the Ragnar clan's younger generation, making their presence overwhelmingly significant. Remington explained he had arrived early to personally observe Theo's swordsmanship before the awakening ceremony began. With a relaxed smile, he saluted Theo and thanked him for agreeing to this sparring request. Known as a sword genius, Remington possessed sharp instincts, refined technique, and relentless work ethic. Even so, he seemed genuinely surprised to encounter someone like Theo emerging unexpectedly as a rival. Theo returned the salute proudly and introduced himself formally as Kyle Ragnar's 31st son, representing the northern lineage. Internally, he was stunned, never expecting to meet or fight someone he admired in his past life. When he expressed honor and crossing blades with Narso's famed young deputy, he meant every word sincerely, fueled by the thrill of continuous combat. Theo wanted to prove his growth against this elite opponent. Both fighters prepared eagerly, clearly anticipating a battle worth remembering between rising talents. Theo watched as Remington's aura surged outward, radiating overwhelming pressure that felt almost suffocating. For a brief moment, Theo questioned whether his current strength was enough to defeat someone like him. They charged simultaneously, blades clashing violently as sparks burst outward with every collision. Each strike carried immense force, shaking the arena while fragments of steel scattered across the battlefield. Theo remained focused, tracking every movement carefully, refusing to lose concentration even for a second. Remington fought with a confident smile, clearly enjoying the intensity of the exchange as much as Theo. After repeated clashes, one blade finally gave way under accumulated stress and continuous impact damage. Evelyn observed everything carefully from the sidelines, never once letting her attention drift away. The defeated young swordsman stood silently, watching with disbelief as the duel reached its turning point. The arena fell, completely silent, as the sound of a broken blade echoed sharply across space. It was Theo's sword that shattered, unable to withstand the sheer force behind Remington's strike. In that decisive moment, Remington cleanly sliced through the blade and halted inches before Theo's neck. To everyone watching, the outcome seemed obvious. Theo had lost the duel against overwhelming strength. Civil struggled to accept it, refusing to believe his idol could fall so quickly during combat. Still, the results spoke clearly, and even he reluctantly acknowledged the unavoidable conclusion. Before him, many believed Theo's growth impressive, but defeating a forehand still seemed completely impossible right now. They held their titles for a reason, representing the absolute peak of their current generation's strength. Even so, Civil insisted Theo's fighting spirit alone was more than enough to admire deeply. Then unexpectedly, Remington declared the duel as his own loss, stunning everyone present instantly. He saluted Theo respectfully and thanked him sincerely, maintaining flawless form and undeniable composure throughout. Remington explained Theo's sword had already weakened before their fight even began earlier that day. He also acknowledged Theo's fatigue from constant battles, which significantly affected his performance during the duel. Theo responded calmly, stating battlefield conditions never allowed fairness, so he accepted defeat immediately. From his perspective, losing his weapon meant losing the fight, regardless of external circumstances involved. Remington simply smiled, understanding Theo's mindset, and extended his hand with genuine respect afterward. They shook hands firmly, forming mutual respect that neither initially expected from this unexpected encounter. Remington expressed hope they could fight again, under proper conditions, where both could perform fully. Theo agreed without hesitation, clearly wanting another chance to test himself against this overwhelming opponent. The crowd watched in disbelief as one of the four hounds acknowledged Theo openly and respectfully. Many realized the young master was no longer ordinary, but someone genuinely rising above expectations rapidly. The duel boosted Theo's quest progress significantly, raising it directly to 35% completion instantly. From the sidelines, Evelyn released a quiet sigh of relief, knowing the outcome couldn't have been better. Theo finally understood the true gap between himself and the four hounds through this intense encounter. Although he had grown stronger through quests, talents, and secret manuals, this clash revealed his limits clearly. Facing Remington's power firsthand made him realize he still lacked strength in many crucial areas. Even though the duel ended prematurely due to his condition, he still gained valuable experience overall. His luck increased by 10 points, while his. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Reputation rose significantly among those who witnessed everything. Still, the quest remained incomplete, meaning he needed additional methods to gain wider approval moving forward. He understood that creating impactful situations would be necessary to push his reputation even further. Remington then revealed he had another purpose beyond simply sparring with Theo that day. He presented a formal invitation, offering Theo entry into the prestigious Scaled Dragon Society. Hearing that name alone caused excitement to ripple across the young swordsmen gathered nearby instantly. The society was known for its strict selection process and high-status members among rising elites. Being invited personally by Remington made it even more significant, elevating the honor dramatically. Theo asked modestly if he truly qualified for such a prestigious group without exaggeration. Remington quickly reassured him, saying he was more than worthy of joining without hesitation. He downplayed the society, describing it as a gathering of peers awaiting the awakening ceremony together. However, Theo understood the deeper reality behind that group and its hidden political connections. That society revolved around his half-brother Action and was filled with individuals who despised him. That made it dangerous, but also the perfect stage for advancing his current quest significantly. Joining would allow him to gather information on Action and Camellia Palace while building reputation simultaneously. Seeing the opportunity clearly, Theo accepted the invitation and thanked Remington for offering it personally. He declared his intention to attend, fully aware he was stepping directly into hostile territory. Remington smiled, satisfied with his response, and shook Theo's hand once more with approval. He welcomed him warmly and offered support whenever Theo needed assistance or guidance moving forward. The meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks, giving Theo limited time to prepare carefully for what awaited. From the sidelines, Evelyn quietly took a drag from her cigarette, clearly concerned about Theo's path. Moments later, news of Theo receiving the high society invitation quickly reached the Rose Palace halls. Cecilia burst into his room with an excited smile, clearly unable to contain herself anymore. Theo had planned to deliver the news personally, but that was obviously unnecessary now. Cecilia had already summoned the palace's grooming team, filling the room with bustling preparation energy. Since it was Theo's first invitation to something truly significant, his mother was naturally thrilled beyond words. The gathering included Action, Emil's cunning son, along with brilliant talents like Remington himself. These young elites even attracted attention from the council, making every detail extremely important. Cecilia understood that Theo's appearance, posture, and demeanor would all be judged closely during this event. Without wasting time, she pulled out a measuring tape and began taking Theo's measurements carefully. Cecilia trusted Theo's etiquette completely, knowing he wouldn't embarrass himself in that regard. However, attire and presentation were entirely different matters that required proper preparation and refinement. Fortunately, This was an area where Cecilia could personally guide him with confidence and experience. After all, she had once been a successful actress, well-versed in elegance and high society standards. She felt genuinely happy being involved, finally able to support her son in something meaningful. Theo understood that his mother had always carried the burden of raising an illegitimate child alone. Cecilia blamed herself for the shameful label placed upon him, even though none of it was truly her fault. In the ruthless Ragnar clan, where strength defined worth, her situation had never been easy. Theo could only imagine how painful it must have been raising a weak child in his past life. Though Cecilia appeared cheerful and excited, deep down she was simply worried about her son's future. She pulled him into a tight embrace, assuring him she would always believe in his potential. Her warmth slowly melted the cold bitterness that had settled deep within Theo's heart. He hugged her back sincerely, holding on to her with genuine affection and quiet determination. This time, he promised himself he would work harder and stop making his mother worry anymore. While Cecilia celebrated his invitation to the Scaled Dragon Society, Theo had very different thoughts entirely. Instead of excitement, he was already imagining crushing that entire nest of arrogant snakes personally. 2 weeks passed quickly, and soon the night of the society banquet finally arrived. Remington personally arrived at the Rose Palace, waiting outside with an elegant, luxurious carriage. The moment he saw Theo, he paused briefly, almost thinking he was looking at someone else entirely. Theo had completely abandoned his usual training attire and now wore refined, high-quality clothing. Thanks to Cecilia and the palace staff, his appearance had transformed into that of a noble aristocrat. Remington commented on his impressive change, and Theo initially assumed he was just joking around. However, Remington clarified he was completely serious, genuinely impressed by Theo's transformation. Theo himself admitted that his body had undergone noticeable changes within those 2 short weeks. He had grown taller, his physique becoming more balanced and muscular through relentless training sessions. Surprisingly, Remington had visited him daily during those weeks, training together and growing closer through constant sparring. During that time, Theo also gained a loyal following, with Sybil and others frequently gathering around him. Evelyn ended up managing an entire group of enthusiastic trainees, despite only agreeing to teach Theo briefly. Those 2 weeks were chaotic yet productive, filled with non-stop training and overwhelming attention. Even now, Theo still felt slightly drained from dealing with so many eager followers daily. As he prepared for his first formal banquet, Remington reassured him there was no need to feel nervous. However, he issued a single warning, explaining that his friend Action could be quite mischievous. It turned out Action himself had requested Theo's invitation, courteous about the so-called rising star. In fact, the entire banquet had been arranged specifically with Theo in mind. Hearing that completely changed the situation, though not necessarily in a negative way for him. If anything, this setup actually worked better for Theo's intentions and future plans. Instead of concern, he found himself looking forward to being mocked and insulted from every direction. Meanwhile, inside the banquet hall, Action Ragnar was already seated, casually sipping expensive alcohol. The Dark Tiger wore a faint smile, clearly anticipating the arrival of his new entertainment. To him, Theo was nothing more than a toy waiting to be broken for amusement. Soon, the carriage rolled to a halt before a lavish palace, marking their arrival clearly. Remington stepped out first, followed by Theo, who immediately scanned the surroundings with sharp eyes. He realized he was about to enter Camellia Palace, the territory of those scumbags. These were the same people who manipulated Ragnar and sabotaged his growth deliberately. In his past life, they had destroyed him, his mother, and the entire Rose Palace mercilessly. That bitter memory stirred quietly, fueling his thoughts of revenge as he stood there silently. His focus broke when Remington casually invited him inside, with his usual energetic attitude. Remington mentioned that Action would personally greet them and should already be waiting outside. Theo understood perfectly why that bastard Action had arranged this invitation in the first place. That idiot probably believed it was his responsibility to suppress Theo's sudden rise in power. However, Theo hadn't walked into this snake pit blindly without preparing something of his own. He fully intended to show Action exactly who he was dealing with today. As they approached the palace entrance, Theo suddenly halted after noticing something strange nearby. From an upper floor, a faint blue light flickered, clearly indicating the presence of a system quest. That brief distraction pulled his attention away, making him unaware of something descending rapidly toward him. Remington reacted instantly, attempting to intercept the incoming object before it reached. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Theo directly. Unfortunately, it exploded into a cloud of white smoke before he could reach it in time. Remington immediately panicked, calling out Theo's name to check if he was unharmed. Thankfully, Theo remained completely fine, only covered lightly in white powder from the explosion. It turned out to be nothing more than a sack of flour thrown from above as a prank. Remington's expression darkened instantly, clearly furious at such childish and disrespectful behavior. Theo calmly noted that he wouldn't have dodged that attack in his previous life at all. Worse, his carefully prepared outfit would have been completely ruined if this had happened earlier. For a moment, he suspected Remington might have been involved, but quickly dismissed the thought. Remington's reaction was genuine, filled with confusion and irritation toward whoever pulled that stunt. Clearly, this immature prank came from those smug nobles watching from the upper floors. It didn't take long before a familiar voice cut through the tension confidently. That voice dismissed the incident as nothing more than a friendly greeting between acquaintances. Remington wasn't buying that excuse at all, and remained visibly annoyed by the situation. Soon enough, Action himself appeared, wearing his usual smug expression without any shame. He casually claimed that the prank was simply a playful welcome for his dear brother, Theo. Theo immediately activated his observation skill, carefully analyzing Action's hidden traits and intentions. The results showed madness, psychopathy, and overwhelming swordsmanship potential within him. At the same time, Action clearly viewed Theo as nothing more than an entertaining new toy. Instead of reacting negatively, Theo smiled and thanked him sincerely, which completely threw Action off guard. He continued by praising Action's welcoming attitude and expressing excitement for the event. That unexpected response only made Action grin wider, clearly enjoying this new version of his brother. To him, Theo had suddenly become far more interesting compared to his previous pathetic self. With that, both Theo and Remington finally entered the grand banquet hall together. Inside, the room was filled with elite young nobles gathered for this exclusive private gathering. Only selected individuals were invited to dine, socialize, and observe potential rivals closely. Everyone present was focused on today's special guest, Theo Ragnar himself. Most couldn't understand why Action invited someone widely known as the clan's useless imbecile. Even though Theo belonged to the Ragnar bloodline, his reputation still disgusted many present. For them, his presence alone felt like an insult to the Scaled Dragon Society. However, they couldn't deny one thing. Theo's appearance was undeniably sharp and refined tonight. His overall presence stood out, even among nobles accustomed to luxury and elegance. Many assumed Action had simply brought him here as entertainment for humiliation. Since these arrogant nobles didn't bother lowering their voices, their insults were clearly audible everywhere. Remington apologized quietly, mentioning that such gatherings were not usually this disgraceful. Theo, however, didn't mind their words in the slightest. In fact, he welcomed their mockery, knowing it would make crushing them later far more satisfying. Meanwhile, his attention shifted again toward the faint blue glow of that hidden quest nearby. He was certain it held importance, but he still needed the right opportunity to approach it naturally. Action, the host of the party, calmly descended the stairs and approached Theo directly. He asked his brother casually whether he was enjoying the banquet so far. Theo forced himself to stay calm, strictly following the plan he had already mapped out. He smiled lightly and thanked Action again for inviting him to such an event. Action then sarcastically apologized for the flower prank from earlier, acting overly playful about it. In the next instant, he closed the distance and grabbed Theo's shoulders tightly. He pressured Theo to accept the apology publicly, putting him on display before everyone present. Remington instinctively moved to step in, sensing the tension rising between the two brothers. However, Theo quickly stopped him, saying there was nothing to apologize for at all. He repeated Action's own words, claiming it was just a greeting between brothers. That response completely caught Action off guard, leaving the psycho momentarily speechless. Action soon laughed it off and patted Theo's back, Like a proud older brother, he admitted he never expected Theo to have this much backbone and attitude now. Compared to their childhood, Theo had clearly changed into someone far more interesting. Action found himself liking this new version of his brother more and more. Meanwhile, the surrounding nobles whispered among themselves, observing Theo's reaction carefully. They mocked him openly, calling him nothing more than Action's personal toy. Some even brought up his illegitimate lineage without any hesitation or shame. They compared him to the noble blood of the Trovan clan, emphasizing the difference brutally. While both Theo and Action were Ragnars, they claimed the gap between them was massive. After all, the Trovan clan was known as a powerhouse of swordsmanship in the East. In contrast, Theo's mother was just a commoner woman, with no noble standing whatsoever. Theo continued smiling as he absorbed every insult thrown in his direction silently. However, the nobles soon shifted their attention toward Remington, questioning his association with Theo. They began insulting Remington as well, calling him an illegitimate son of the Narcelo family. That crossed a dangerous line, pushing Remington closer to losing control. He had been tense since arriving, and hearing that forbidden topic almost made him snap instantly. Theo noticed this shift, and realized Remington might act if things continued like this. If that happened, Theo would lose control of the stage he was carefully building. He had planned to endure more insults for a while longer, but that strategy no longer worked. Before Action could lead him elsewhere, Theo suddenly paused. He stated that since he had just arrived, he should greet everyone properly. First, with that, he walked straight toward the banquet table where the mocking nobles were gathered. Every single pair of eyes followed him, curious about what the imbecile would do next. Theo calmly picked up a bottle of wine from the table without saying anything. He approached the noble who had been insulting Remington's lineage moments earlier. The man smirked arrogantly, asking if he had said something wrong just now. Theo adjusted his grip slightly, and without hesitation smashed the bottle directly onto his head. The glass shattered violently, leaving blood dripping down the noble's blonde hair instantly. The entire hall froze, shocked by the sudden and brutal turn of events. Even Remington and Action were caught completely off guard by Theo's actions. The injured noble clutched his head, screaming in pain while blood soaked his hair. Theo stood above him, still holding the broken bottle without any trace of hesitation. The man tried to curse Theo, continuing his arrogant rant despite the situation. Before he could finish, Theo delivered a brutal kick that shattered the noble's jaw completely. The impact silenced him instantly, leaving only muffled sounds as he collapsed helplessly. Theo's eyes turned cold, his expression losing any trace of earlier calmness. He claimed this was simply his version of a friendly greeting, just like earlier. According to him, he only responded because the greeting he received was unpleasant. The surrounding nobles stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. At that moment, Theo's quest progress silently increased, reaching 43% instantly. Remington watched closely, realizing this behavior didn't match Theo's usual personality at all. He began to suspect Theo was doing this deliberately, for a deeper reason. As the injured noble lay bleeding on the palace floor, Theo stepped forward calmly again. He declared that since greetings were exchanged, it was now time for farewells as well. He grabbed the man's arm and forced him onto a nearby platform. The noble begged desperately for Theo to stop, but his pleas were completely ignored. Theo raised his foot and stomped down brutally, shattering the man's arm with a sickening crack. The horrifying sound echoed across the silent banquet hall. Every noble who had been mocking him earlier now stood speechless, fear replacing their arrogance instantly. Theo's quest progress surged again, reaching 58% after that display. The injured noble passed out, unable to endure the pain any longer. Drewland blood stained the expensive palace floor, as Theo casually discarded the body aside. He looked around at the remaining nobles. He asked calmly if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.